All right, well, I think we will go ahead and get started, and then we can just welcome others as they come in. We won't go backwards. So welcome again to everyone. This is Maynard Costerisan's nonprofit webinar focusing on process improvements and risk assessment. So we're excited to have you here. My name is Sarah Jennings. I am a partner within Maynard Costerisan's Accounting and Outsourced Solutions Department, focusing on fraud, forensic, non-traditional consultative engagements. And truthfully, what I love about my job is making sure that we find the right solutions for all of our clients. I'm the niche leader, industry leader for our nonprofit area as well. So it's exciting when we can bring all of our different gurus together to provide some great solutions for all of you. So again, thank you for coming. I will let Bethany and Wes do an introduction before we get started as well. Bethany, you want to go first?
Sure thing. So as Sarah said, my name is Bethany Verbal. I'm a manager in the audit department at Maynard. I work largely with nonprofits and governments. So outside of my role in the audit department, though, I work really, really closely with Sarah, which is the best, on risk assessments, fraud investigations, and process reviews, which is why I'm super, super excited that we have this webinar going on today, and we can talk a little bit more about what the process is and why it's so beneficial for any size nonprofit.
Wonderful, thank you. And Wes?
Thank you, Bethany. So my name is Wes Salisbury. I am a manager in the technology department of Maynard Costerisan. And part of what I do on a day-to-day basis is implement software solutions and accounting, specifically accounting and integration softwares to, as it pertains to process improvements, implement approval processes and digitizing traditionally paper or manual processes to become digitized and follow certain sets of rules to help make life easier and more traceable for our organizations, both on the not-for-profit side as well as the for-profit side. So that kind of sums up my introduction that I want to do. So back to you, Sarah.
Perfect. Again, I will thank everybody for coming. And just to let you know, we do have the chat function. You should be able to type in comments as we go. If you have anything, feel free to raise your hand. I'll be monitoring that. And there's also some Q&As. At the end, we'll have specific time for some discussion and questions. But if there's anything, as I said, that you've got as we go along, please feel free to type it in and we will address it as we go. All right, I am going to share my screen now and get things rolling.
I have still not mastered that seamless share. I'm impressed, Sarah.
Well, that wasn't seamless. I had an extra step in there. So again, we're here to talk about understanding process reviews, and the way that we've looked at it today is really breaking it up into three different parts. So there's internal controls, as we talked about. That's really focused on, how to protect your organization. Bethany's going to start off there. Then Wes is going to go into process efficiencies, and then we're going to talk a little bit. I don't want to say it's kind of a trending topic right now, but enterprise risk management and what that really means. And then, as I said before, we have time for questions at the end, but certainly ask questions throughout and we will do our best to address anything.
All right, well, I will go ahead and kick us off. So my portion today is really focusing on the internal control side of the process review. So the one thing that I want to start out discussing before we really dig into it is the difference between an audit and a process review. So often we get clients, referral sources, they call us and say, I need an audit. And that is absolutely sometimes the case. Sometimes you've gotten new grant dollars, maybe you have a new loan and it's part of your bank covenant. So you might need a financial statement audit. Something absolutely Maynard can do. Oftentimes though, once we actually start talking, once we drill down into what you need, we discover that you don't need an audit and you're actually going to be far better served by getting one of these process reviews. So let's kind of talk about the differences. So in an audit, we want to obtain reasonable assurance that the financial statements are materially correct. In a more layperson term, we want to make sure that an informed reader of the financial statements can understand them and can make decisions based off of them. So an audit's not there to find fraud. the audit opinion that we issue isn't going to guarantee everything that's correct, but it is going to tell readers of the financial statements that we had an independent third-party CPA that looked through the financial statements. They looked at a sample of transactions, they requested documentation, they did analytics, they discussed. So it's definitely an in-depth process. But here's where, depending on what your goal is, audits aren't necessarily going to meet you where you need to be. Auditors are going to look at your internal controls. We're required to. We're going to test a couple of transactions and might have some general comments. But what an audit isn't going to do is a deep dive into every financial process at your organization and assess where you have lapses, or even if you don't have a lapse, you can make your control stronger or you can be more efficient. So if what you want is a set of financial statements with a third-party opinion, an audit is a great option. But if what you're looking for is a multi-step process to assess your controls, prevent fraud, and also have a really great way to demonstrate to your stakeholders that you're putting your money to the mission, a process review is where you want to go. Now, one last thing on audits versus process reviews before we start really delving into the review. These two items, an audit and a process review, don't necessarily have to be mutually exclusive. So if your organization has grown substantially in the last few years, or you started a new program, or you've had a lot of turnover, sound familiar to anyone? Having a process review in addition to a financial statement audit is a really great option. You still get your audit opinion, which you might be required to have, but you're taking it to that next level. So now that we've kind of talked about the differences, let's talk about the internal control aspect of the process review. Sarah, could you kick it to the next? Thank you. So anytime the conversation is focusing on internal controls, we start with one of the most important tools in fraud prevention, which is the fraud triangle. I'm sure many of you have heard about it. The triangle helps us assess more on the preventative side where we can protect our organization from being the victim of fraud, or on the detection side where we went wrong. Now, what you can see on this slide is a portion of the Association of Certified Fraud Examiner, or ACFE's 2022 report to the nations, which is a global report that helps fraud examiners determine where we're seeing the greatest impact and where the trends really are in fraud. So as you can see here, just from a global perspective, fraud is extremely impactful. We're looking at anywhere from $100,000 to $600,000 in median losses. Those are very real, very big numbers, and we don't want to be the victim of that. We don't want to be the news story that talks about the local nonprofit that didn't have adequate controls, so someone made off with $200,000 of funds that should have gone to our mission. So since you're joining us today, you're making a great step on that prevention side, which from my perspective is the more fun side. Prevention conversations are great. It's things like this, because we're talking about protecting assets. We're making sure that every dollar that we have goes towards supporting our mission. The detection conversation, not as fun, just because we've had an issue and we're kind of picking up the pieces. So process reviews are really all about prevention. So let's talk about the fraud triangle. So that first leg is pressure. This is any sort of financial need or pressure. Someone might have a gambling problem or has a significant amount of medical debt. Whatever it is, someone is feeling a significant amount of external pressure to increase their personal cash flow. Not a ton that a process review can do here. External pressures are external, but, and this is where we really hit hard in a process review, we have the next two legs of the triangle, and this is where we can make a really big impact. So just because someone has pressure doesn't mean they're going to necessarily be able to commit fraud. We have to have opportunity. So if we have a lapse in internal controls, we have a bank reconciliation process that doesn't allow for review, or we have a vendor onboarding process that isn't quite what it needs to be, we're creating an opportunity. We're making it easy for someone who has that external pressure to potentially want to start looking at fraud. And the last leg is another one that process reviews really help with. It's rationalization. So the person committing the fraud has to be able to say to themselves, what I'm doing isn't really wrong. Sometimes you hear people say, well, I was going to pay it back. But the other common thing that you hear is, well, the way that our organization is structured, fraud was kind of the cost of doing business. So by having a process review, you're really creating this environment where we are saying internal controls are important. We are willing to put our money where our mouth is and have people come in and tell us where we have lapses, where we need to strengthen what we have. So now that I've mostly convinced you that you need a process review, you might be wondering, how does it start? And what do I, the nonprofit, have to do? So probably my favorite part of doing these is most of what we do is a conversation. We're going to sit down with everyone that has a hand in the financial process, the CFO to your administrative assistant that makes an initial listing of checks received. And I want to hear what you do on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. The goal is to really understand what each person does and how they function as a part of the whole. I'm going to ask for any manuals and handbooks that you currently have that detail out your processes and internal controls, as well as an organizational chart. I want to understand how information flows throughout your organization, who it's going between, who's in the review process. Once we've done all that information gathering, that's really the biggest piece of it, then comes the assessment. We're going to take everything that we learned and say, based on the triangle, based on our experience with best practices and what we've seen of the worst practices too, we're going to learn from those mistakes too. We're going to help you assess where you're strong, where you could get better, and where I'm feeling a little bit worried. I like to say this is really a group project. I want to know too, where do you have concerns? Where do things get hung up in the review process? Where do you sit back and go, you know, if I really wanted to, I could probably commit fraud. So I'm going to ask those questions and we're going to brainstorm that together. So it really is a group project. Once we've assessed, then comes the recommendations. And this is what we're here for. It's going to be the tangible representation of everything that we've done. So what I particularly like about Maynard's process, I'm not going to give you basic recommendations. I'm not going to say, make sure you sign off on invoices or strengthen up that vendor onboarding process. It's going to be specific, tailored recommendations that are going to protect you. But as Wes is going to talk about too, I'm not necessarily going to tell you you need to add 10 hours to your workday. No one has time for that. So we're going to focus on effective, efficient ways that you can strengthen your controls, because there are ways to do it, but we have to be strategic about it. The other thing that I really, really like about our process is Maynard, as part of our process, puts together risk and efficiency matrices. So you might be sharing this information with stakeholders who maybe aren't accountants, maybe don't want to read a long document. So this is going to be a really great visual representation of where we want to focus, because I think we all know you can make large overnight changes to your organization, but it's probably not going to go well. It's probably not going to be effective. So we want to make incremental changes, but we want to start with the greatest area of impact. We want to start with the greatest place that we can impact our organization, or we can really strengthen our internal controls and protect us. So by having these matrices as part of our narrative, we really have a comprehensive picture that tells you not only here's how we can strengthen, here's how we can get better, and here's where you really want to focus the beginning of your attention. So that's the internal control aspect of a process review. So I'm going to kick it over to Wes, and he's going to give us the technology aspect.
All right, cool. Thank you, Bethany. Yep, Sarah, you can probably, yep, you got it. All right, so just to piggyback off of a little bit what you said, Bethany, one of the legs of the fraud triangle that you showed was opportunity. So from a technology standpoint, we can't really remove rationalization or pressures, because that's kind of like an external thing that's happening in people's minds. But what technology can really help with is mitigating opportunities, getting rid of the opportunities or the ability to act on pressures to commit fraud. So, like I said, I do a lot of work in technology, and as part of moving some of your internal controls into a more digitized and using software solutions to do these things, it's not going to add time to your day. In fact, by adding additional controls and putting them on using technology correctly, you could actually make your life more efficient and actually free up time for people to do more value add activities. An example, just again to piggyback off of Bethany's example, one of the things that I've done before quite a few times is put in controls into an accounting system where, first of all, only certain people can approve vendors, but there's a separation of duties between who can create vendors and modify vendors, as well as who approves them. And whenever a vendor is created, a new vendor is created, or an existing vendor is modified, it needs to go through a whole approval process before it can be used. This helps mitigate someone from going into the accounting system and changing some banking information on the vendor to route those funds to their own account or something along those lines. So that not only does a process like that, when you use software to do that, not only does it make life more efficient, but it also reduces the risk of fraud. Anyway, to move on to kind of move on to my portion of this slide here. When it comes to looking at how to make your processes more efficient, when you move these processes off to software correctly, you can do a lot more with less. So let's just say, for example, today you're maintaining spreadsheets regarding all these different approvals that have happened, right? So you're maybe using email and Excel to say this purchase requisition has been approved by this person on this date. Maybe this payment was approved by this person on this date. It becomes well, first of all, it's such a manual process because you have to send emails back and forth to get approvals on things. You have to make sure those are documented. And then you have to have some type of master document that helps you prove that something was approved. However, when you I'm going to use Sage Intacct as an example, just because that's a major product I do a lot of work on. So if you use an accounting software like Sage Intacct, for example, you can have end users input requisitions to purchase something, and then based on the nature of that purchase, it gets routed to a person automatically. So you don't have to send an email separately and say, hey, can you please approve this? It gets automatically routed to that person, and the approver gets an email saying, this person entered in a purchase requisition for this, so please go into Intacct and approve it. Furthermore, the approver, they then log into the accounting system and they say, okay, I either approve this or I decline this. And they can leave comments saying, why did I approve this? Why did I decline it? Things like that. And all that, even if that document went back and forth and got declined a bunch of times and resubmitted, each one of those steps is going to be documented automatically in the accounting system. And this is a permanent record that cannot be deleted. The rules of the system just don't allow you to get rid of this. So not only does it take the burden off of your team to keep records on this, but it's also permanent. And if your email server goes down or you lose that master document of all these approvals, you don't have to worry as much about losing one document and losing all that history. Yep. So that's a good example of what you can do with not only just enhancing your fraud mitigation, internal controls, but also it helps makes life more simplistic and efficient for you.
And Wes, just to follow up on that comment, just briefly, the other thing that I think we've seen a ton of clients that are starting to get out of email file storage and getting into something that's more streamlined. At the end of the year, if you do have an audit, it makes that process much more streamlined, and it isn't so burdensome. I mean, in past years, we've had clients that they pretty much are out of commission in their normal job for the whole week of the audit because they're pulling invoices and they're, showing documentation of approval. If you move into something that's more streamlined like that, you give a login to the auditors and they can look for themselves. The auditors appreciate it because it's all there. It's through the computer. Instead of auditing around the computer, they're looking at the controls of the system. So I think that there's just a lot of benefits even after the fact of the initial implementation.
And as an auditor,
yeah.
I'll tell you, I'll bother you less.
Yeah, that's really a major movement that we've been seeing a lot of. Is traditionally you keep all your documentation in these big file cabinets, which of course is a lot of effort to go and find the right documentation, whether it's your team or the auditors doing it. But when you migrate to modern accounting solutions, you can bring in digital copies of your invoices as well as any other supporting documentation. And that's related directly, again, saved permanently in the system as part of the record. So all you have to do is give your auditor a login. They look at maybe a general ledger report, and then they say, oh, I want to test this transaction. They click into it. They can see the copy of the invoice. And then if you're using the accounting system as part of your purchasing approvals, you can see where that bill was linked to a purchase order and where that purchase order was approved and who it was approved by. So you have a full set of matching, and you're able to see the entire life cycle of the transaction. Who approved it and when was it ordered, and then when you got the invoice for it, as well as where it was posted and what the invoice looked like and things like that. So yeah, and again, that's just an efficiency thing. You no longer have to go filing through a whole bunch of paper copies of documentation. And like what Bethany said, if you're under audit, or your auditors are going to ask you for a lot less stuff regarding that. So the other thing I'd like to mention as part of this is when you digitize something and move it off and utilize technology, it really allows you to be a lot more scalable. Because kind of thinking about processes right now, if you're just doing a manual paper process or an email process, if you only have a few different approvers, it may not seem so bad. But the thing is as your organization scales up, as you maybe bring on new grants, or your organization just grows, and from a people perspective, that becomes more and more difficult to maintain. And then your resources kind of become stretched thin because you're spending more time doing admin than actually focusing on your mission. So when you utilize proper softwares to do some of these approvals and automate your processes, you can scale a lot better so that the system is just handling more and more transactions and you're not having to keep track of all that. So it really allows your organization to grow, and you don't have to go out and hire additional people just to, route emails and keep documentation on approvals.
Wes, I think that is another point, just to put an exclamation point. Over the last 4 years, we've seen so many nonprofits and for-profits in particular, everyone going through some sort of pivot. It's scalability, right? It could be growth, but it could be contraction, unfortunately. And in streamlining things like this just allows for that flexibility. And you may be going down for a period, but it's not going to mean that you necessarily have to get rid of people, because your systems are so scalable. Yep. It allows for that flexibility. So I think it kind of goes both ways.
Yep, absolutely. And like I said before, if you migrate to a process like this and make yourselves more efficient, you're freeing up your staff's time to spend more time on your mission and other value add activities, like just using some generic examples, maybe optimizing vendor relationships, or maybe finding other things to automate internally. than just sometimes when you get busy with your day to day, you sometimes lose track of some of the forward thinking stuff to help make your organization better, because you're kind of moving papers around and keeping documentation on things. So I think, oh, go ahead, Beth.
I was gonna jump in. No, so we have an article that was put out recently on Mainer's website, and we talk about too, having this sort of 21st century perspective that Wes is talking about. That's what's going to attract and keep your best talent. You want to attract the people that are innovative, are forward thinking, want to be able to focus on your mission, not on your purchase order approval process. So when we are leveraging technology, like Wes is saying, we're going to attract and keep the people that we really want to. I won't interrupt again.
No, you can always feel free to interrupt, Bethany, but yeah, that's totally true. That's totally true, because let's face it, it's a lot more fun and meaningful to really spend your time on more forward thinking things and, hey, how do I help my organization execute on their mission better, versus moving papers and sending emails and maintaining spreadsheets. That's not super exciting. But on this particular tab right here, as part of the process to determine how can we make your processes more efficient, in general, kind of similar to what Bethany mentioned earlier, we're going to come in and we're going to discover what your current process is and what team members are all as part of each process. And then at that point, we can determine where can technology be implemented to enhance these controls and lessen the workload, the manual human workload of these different processes. So that may be an accounting system or we may assess accounting systems that could be helpful for you. Maybe not something to that scale, maybe just maybe smaller tools than that to help shore up your internal controls. And then make a recommendation and a return on investment, how long it may take to return your investment back, which in my opinion, from a technology perspective, the time to value or the ROI on implementing software for this purpose, the ROI is quick. And especially if you refer to that, you don't have to move to that slide, but that slide earlier, you're talking about median losses from some of these instances of fraud at 6 figures. It's not usually you're not going to spend that much on an accounting software package or a software package unless you're a very, very, very large organization.
And Wes, talk a little bit more. So clearly we can help with a lot of these assessments, but some of the stuff that our clients can certainly do internally. And it amazes me when we start talking about the different softwares that organizations use, how many there really are and how they may or may not talk to each other at all. So talk a little bit about how, when you go in to do this technology assessment, how you do kind of a grid of all the different platforms that they're using for accounting, for member services, for donor databases, for Zoom platforms, for learning management systems, because nonprofits, I think, are even a little bit more unique than for-profits in how many different things people are utilizing, because some things are just so dramatically different program to program. And I think that you are really, really good, and the rest of the technology team, at really helping to assess, like, I may not know the answer, but I know there's way too many things on this list, is kind of how I approach it with clients sometimes.
Yep, absolutely. And yeah, thank you, Sarah. And yeah, coming up with a grid of all the different softwares in play currently and how you get data out of it, and kind of the motion of what do we take out of this system? Which system do we move it to? What type of workload does that all include? Yeah, that's all part of it. And one of the cool things that we can do here in technology is it's pretty well, like you said, Sarah, in the not-for-profit space, I'll definitely say that there's more systems in play. There's more systems floating around in the ecosystem when strictly compared to for-profits. But one of the things as part of the technology assessment we can discover is what opportunities do we have for enhanced integration of these systems, right? Because there may be a lot of instances where IMIS is a popular membership database that we work with. Maybe currently the organization is doing an export of IMIS data and then having to spend hours manipulating the data to get it into their current accounting system. We can utilize integration tools and integration practices to pull that data on a more automated basis, where it doesn't really require as much human modification of the data. It's more of a push button, run the process, pull the data down, and then push it into the accounting system. Not only does this take alleviate some of the burden of human processing things, but since it's done by way of program, it's very consistent as well. So it's ran exactly the same every single time. And those processes can be modified for each individual program. Because like you said, Sarah, each program may be different in how things are accounted for and how things need to be moved. But yes, integration and automating the data flows between systems is also a very important part of making life easier in your process.
And not only making life, I mean, it's critical for that when we start talking about and thinking about the ROI. That's really important too, because so often I see, especially nonprofits have their mission and they're in it for their members or their stakeholders or, whatever the cause is, which is incredibly important. Because of that, I find a lot of times we tend to focus on price instead of long-term quality or long-term ease of use and efficiency for some of the products, because we really want to have an impact today. And sometimes when we look at the long-term ROI, that it isn't our best bet for the long-term goal and long-term gains of the organization, because we end up with increased clunkiness, more time for training new staff and new people on it. If anything changes, it's like the domino effect. It changes 12 things instead of one change. So yeah, I think those are all things that we can help organizations can start to think about.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and when it comes to training, just imagine you have kind of one person who their main role is pull data from this system, manipulate it in a certain way, and then bring it into the accounting system. When you need to onboard a new person to do that, the training process and the onboarding process can be quite long, and it can be sometimes painful because in some of these movements of data, things need to go perfectly. But if you digitize it and automate it and build an integration around it, it's more of like push the button and it does whatever you need it to do, and then you can move on to something else. So it helps make the transition between people much easier as well.
Very good. I'll say again, we are open to questions. We've got a few that have come in. So if you have any, just put them in the Q&A. You can put them anonymous. If you don't want, then they'll just come to us if you don't want to share them with the whole thing. And I did notice, I think our chat is actually disabled. So I misspoke and said that you could put anything in there. I think we can put things in there, but I'm not sure all the participants can chat. So I do apologize for that. And then the other thing I just wanted to mention is I want to make sure that it's clear. All of these things, again, clearly Maynard Costerisan, any of us can come in and help, but these are really critical things for you all to think about in your organizations as you're getting ready for year-end planning or planning for next year, strategic planning. These are things that you can absolutely start the conversations on your own. And as we get into the next topic, the enterprise risk management, it becomes even more important, I think, to be thinking about these things overall. So enterprise risk management is one of those things that you hear about a lot in the news. You hear a lot about for really, really large organizations that are required to have some sort of a system in place or audits on their enterprise risk management system. In the governmental realm, we're seeing it more and more that it's a requirement for some funders. They're wanting to see what the analysis is or what the assessment is on the enterprise risk management system. And really to really cover it overall, really it's bringing it together. internal controls, governance, process efficiencies, making sure that you're looking at more than just financial controls, more than just the accounting system, but you're really looking at all of it in order to make sure that you can fulfill your mission for years to come, not just today, but for the next 10, 20, 50 years. It really looks at overall health, not just pieces. And I think that oftentimes when we look at these individual assessments or reviews, internal control reviews, process assessment, sometimes it's pieces of the whole. Enterprise risk management is really just looking at the organization from the top down. So again, really in enterprise risk management, I'll talk about this just for a couple minutes. I want to make sure that we've got time for some overall conversation about some of the questions that have come in also. But really, when you're looking at your enterprise risk management system, you're looking at the strategy. So hopefully your organizations are doing strategic planning every single year. And if you're not looking at the next 10 years, every year, you're at least evaluating what you did within the last 3 years and making sure it still stays consistent. I would anticipate there are a lot of changes to strategic plans over the last 3 years, because what you wanted 4 years ago and the way you were going to get there is undoubtedly dramatically different today than you thought it was going to be. You might still have the same mission, but the way that the path to get there is going to be very, very different. So when you're looking at the strategy and you're really looking at the objectives of the organization, always, every time you start these conversations, you're starting with mission, vision, and values. Where's the organization going? Making sure that that's communicated across, not just at the leadership or at the board level. Every single team member and every single stakeholder should see that and should be hearing that consistently. It's really looking at the governance structure and the culture. When you have governance rules, they're not just rules that are verbal rules, they're written rules so that it's consistently followed. The plan is followed. Communication is the same, so people know what to expect. And then you're defining the organization's objectives. Again, I think a lot of times when we talk about strategy, it comes from the top, but it isn't necessarily all the way through the organization. So when we're talking about strategy and looking at where we want to go, you're engaging the entire team, from the receptionist to the CEO and everything in between. And then you're also looking at the strategic planning and development. You're looking at all of these different factors. When you're looking at the system, that's where you start. You look at the culture, you look at the mission, so that you really have an overall understanding of what the organization is here to do. Then you move into the risk identification. This part isn't just focusing on what Bethany was talking about, making sure the assets are safe, or what Wes was talking about, making sure that you have enough resources and efficiencies to get everything going. You're also looking at external factors. You're looking at the litigation environment that we're in. You're looking at government. You're looking at the political aspects. You're looking at more environmental, social things that are going on around you, and how is that impacting your organization. I think nonprofits, again, over the last 3 years, not that we want to bring everything back to the pandemic, but over the last 3 years, look at how our missions may have changed. Our member, if we're a trade association or we're serving some member, the needs of our members have changed dramatically. And the way that we're able to deliver the services has changed very, very dramatically. All of those were external things that we had no control over, but we better be ready for them. So those are the sorts of risks. Now we know we have to be ready for another pandemic, whether we want to or not. Knock on wood somewhere that doesn't happen quite the way it did again. But I think now we learned a lot to be ready for that. And all of these things, all of these risks and vulnerabilities that we're looking at, you're looking at how that'll impact the sustainability of your organization for the future, right? We've seen a lot of nonprofits get an influx of funding over the last few years because of the CARES Act, because of new grants that are still coming in. A couple things. One, is it a risk that grant's going to be gone, and how have you changed your organization to be able to take that funding, right? So in 3 years from now, when that grant's gone, what are you going to do? Hopefully you're evaluating these risks and you're making sure that whatever programs you're implementing are going to be sustainable at the end of the grant program. So even when the funding's gone, your people can still be there. Things like that you're really looking at. And then you're looking at the assessment. So you're looking at, Bethany mentioned this a little bit when she was going through the internal control piece, but you're looking at overall all of the risks, and you're kind of putting it into a heat map, if you will. So you can say, you can prioritize. We know that you can't deal with all of the risks and vulnerabilities at the same time. And frankly, an organization doesn't even want to. Some of them, you're acknowledging it's a risk and you're just accepting that risk because it isn't worth it to you to mitigate it any more than you are right now. So this assessment phase in the middle of this system is really just making sure everybody's on the same page with where it falls in the plot map. Everybody knows the priority. Everybody knows the ramifications. If you don't do anything with this vulnerable area, this is what could happen. Everybody's on the same page. We accept it, or we go to the next level and we say, okay, here's our response. This is what we're going to do in order to mitigate this risk. So then in this fourth section, if you will, the risk response, you're looking at what you need to do. You're making a plan for action, oversight, and updates. So this is where you're responding to it. You're holding people accountable to making sure that we tackle these vulnerabilities. And again, this isn't just focused on the financial internal controls or the process improvement that Wes was talking about, making sure that we don't lose that data. It's also responding to our environment around us. It's making sure that we have people on our team that are paying attention to how legislation is impacting our nonprofit. Charitable organizations in the past, I don't want to say that that they didn't have or didn't feel as much skin in the game with some of the policy that's going on, but I think it's definitely been ramped up over the last 4 years. We see it in all different areas, not just some of the historical areas that we've seen people really interested and engaged on the legislative side. It's all over the board. So we need to make sure that that's somebody's responsibility to be looking at what grant opportunities are out there and how things are impacting our organization. And then the last column we've got is communication and monitoring. So after you go through this, evaluating the overall organization, looking at what vulnerabilities we have, assessing where everything lies, responding to it. This is really our plan, right? Then the last piece is communicating that, because we all know you can do all of the planning in the world. If you don't talk about that with your team, your stakeholders, and your board, it doesn't really exist. So this is just saying, you know, at the end of this plan, when you're sitting down with your team, you're not just sitting down with them at the end of the strategic planning period. You're communicating it over and over and over again in different means so that people hear it, so that people know that you really value it, so that people know that you're going to pay attention to it, and you're always holding people accountable for that. And I put repeat on there because it's so important to not just make it a one and done sort of a plan. You might as well not waste your time, in my opinion, going through all of this work if you're going to just say it once. And then it's also important whenever you have a risk management plan, when you're looking to make sure that you've got sustainability, that you're scalable, you figure out what you're reporting on so that people can see that you're making progress. We found these vulnerable areas in our environment, or we found these vulnerable areas in our IT side, whatever it might be. This is what we're doing as an organization to make sure that we're responding to those things. And again, communication is critical in that area. I'm going to take just a moment and see what other questions might have come in. I know we've got just a few minutes. We wanted to make sure that these sessions are concise and timely so that if there are any questions, we have a little bit of time. Really, we want to make sure that the Maynard Costerisan team is here to help start ideas, start discussions within your organization, and then clearly we're always here as a resource. So let me see, I've got one that came in. This is one I think that both of you, I'd like Bethany and Wes for you both to kind of opine on this. So it's easy to say that we should do this as an organization, right? Everybody, we know as professionals, we know everybody should do internal control risk assessment, and everybody should take time to make sure they're doing things as efficiently as possible every day. We don't have time. So how do you, when you're talking to clients about this, how do you help them make the time for some of these things that there's no, I mean, we're all strapped. We're all trying to do more with less hours, it seems like, in the day. Time's moving too fast. What thoughts do you have on that?
So I'll kick it off, and then Wes interrupt or follow up, whatever you prefer. So from my perspective, some of that, to Sarah's point, is we are all very, very strapped for time. So no, you don't have time right now, but how can you not make the time? Because what the appropriate internal controls, what Wes was talking about on the efficiency side. If you're saving yourself 5-10 hours a week, how can you not make the time here to save yourself that on the back end? And I think the other thing too, and this is kind of, auditor's perspective. I think when people hear internal control review, they still think audit, and they think someone's going to come in for a week. They're going to take over our conference room. They're going to ask me 5 million questions. I'm going to have to pull every single invoice it feels like we wrote for the year. That's not what this is. These are, yes, it's conversation. Yes, it's time. But I'm not necessarily asking you to pull me a whole bunch of documentation. It's really collaboration between everyone to help you get better. So it's going to be less of a time investment on the front end, that you're going to see a better return on that on the back end.
Yep, I'm certainly in agreement with you there, Bethany. It may seem like it's not really an ordeal on the front end to coordinate all this, but your time to value is pretty short. Like, yeah, you do need to wrangle up some hours to get the process started and to implement some controls, but it's going to save you time. It's definitely going to save you time in the future. So there you really have to find a way to, if you really have no time, if you're like super strapped for time, you just have to put yourself in the mindset of, if I spend a little bit of extra time, if I'm able to find some stray hours here and there, I'm going to be able to recognize I'm going to have more free time in the future because we did this. And
we'll go to lunch.
Yeah.
Everyone has to eat lunch. So like, we'll keep talking over lunch. It'll be great.
Yeah, exactly. Just ordering some takeout or something and just keep talking over lunch. Because really, it's you're gaining such efficiencies in the long term. And like I said, the time to value is going to be it's still going to be relatively short after you get used to the new the new process. But yeah, that's personally the strategy that I've used in the past. It's just
one of the other things. Oops, I'm sorry, Wes. One of the other things I think that we started to talk about a little bit, and Bethany, I think you mentioned it, is the talent. So there's still a talent war out there. I think that innately people want to help, want to improve, want to do better. And if you start engaging your team about how can we do better, how can we collaborate with each other to brainstorm best practices and to brainstorm, control vulnerabilities. How do we do this together? I think that's team engagement for all of your team to come together. So I think that there's lots of benefits when you really start brainstorming internal. You may not have all the answers, but there's other resources out there. There's other people that can come in and say, hey, yeah, I've seen that issue, or I've worked with clients to solve that before. I have another question, and Wes, we'll start with you on this one. So there's some fear, maybe is too strong of a word, but there's some fear when you start streamlining things that you actually lose some of the internal controls because things start just happening. How do you work with leadership teams, and how do you advise teams to make sure that they're not losing controls when things just appear to be happening? Because I'm not holding on to a piece of paper, physically signing off on something.
Right. Yeah. So I think kind of the best way that I'll answer that is, it's just whatever process you're configuring, especially when you're using technology. If you're putting a bit of technology as part of this process, definitely make sure you have robust rules around when things happen and how they should happen. Because theoretically, you can streamline something, but if you don't take the proper precautions to make sure the rules are in place, then, like you said, Sarah, some things just happen. But as part of a proper assessment and a proper implementation of technology, you need to make sure that your rules are strict enough to help ensure that that same process is being followed with what I've seen in my in what I do is we put in some process controls, and sometimes people will push back and say that's a little bit too strict. We want things to be a little bit more open-ended. that's from a fraud prevention and from an internal control standpoint, that's a no-no, because then it kind of permits other people to hop in and do certain things on behalf of other people just for the sake of time, or just for the sake of some, like, in the moment, just get it done quickly, even though it's not really the right way of doing it.
Yep. And Bethany, to follow up on that idea, what do you recommend? Because oftentimes you see auditors, they come in and they ask for the same things, but that's because that's what they ask for. So I feel like clients sometimes feel like, I've seen clients print things out that were approved electronically just so they can hand it to the auditor. So what advice do you have to make sure that everybody's open with communication and I guess kind of a warm fuzzy for clients, that you don't have to do those sorts of things? Auditors can do the technology.
You absolutely, if you have stuff electronic, I'm gonna speak for all auditors here and say you don't have to print it for me. I'm comfortable making that blanket statement. But no, I think it's all about communication. Talk to your audit team. Tell them, hey, we're going through this process. We want to get better. We want to be more efficient. We are moving towards electronic approval systems. One, your auditor is going to be excited. They're probably going to be pretty proud of you because you're taking this really, really great step. But then it's, communicating with your auditor and saying, okay, I can give you access to these items electronically. What do you need to see? What are you looking to see from an internal control standpoint, from a process standpoint, so that, we continue to have those clean audit opinions. So I think it really comes down to communication. Don't leave your auditors in the dark. And it's a two-way street. They got to ask, and you got to, kind of let them know when things change. But I think it's really focusing on that collaboration and communication.
Thank you. I think you're right. All of this actually is about open communication and making sure that we're all working together, internal teams, boards, the whole thing. Well, that actually, we're a little bit over, but I wanted to make sure we got in those couple of questions that people had sent in. So thank you all very much for joining us today. You will be receiving a follow-up survey. So if there's anything that you want to hear about in future sessions, I know we are, the nonprofit committee is working to get some more technical year-end training, probably November-ish timeframe. That should be settled within the next week and a half or so. We're going for like 9 topics in 90 minutes, 10 topics in 100, something super catchy and clever that we can come up with. So if there's any topics, like I said, that you have interest in, please don't hesitate to let us know. You can email any of us individually. I'll make sure that our emails are in the follow-up survey that comes out, or certainly maynard@maynardcpa.com is a great way to make sure that you get somebody quickly as well. So thank you all again so very much. Thanks, Bethany. Thanks, Wes, for putting in the time today and getting everything ready.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. You're very welcome.
And we will wish you all a great afternoon and a lovely fall. Thanks so much.